Welcome to the Power of Partnership podcast. I'm Riane Eisler, President of the Center for Partnership Systems. This podcast brings you voices from the partnership movement, people using partnership practices to build a world that values caring, nature, and shared prosperity. The Power of Partnership podcast is hosted by Cherry Jacobs Pruitt, a health policy and partnership scholar. And now on to today's POP podcast episode.
Welcome, Rebecca. On behalf of Riane Eisler and the entire Center for Partnership Systems team, I want to thank you for being on the Power of Partnership podcast. I'm super excited to be talking with you today about how approaching change from a partnership framework can help it go from something that we're often afraid of to something that allows us to reach our full potential as humans. So, Rebecca, you are a recognized leader in developing new strategies and frameworks to affect change. You've worked across a wide range of subject matters, including federal land management, information systems, the arts, education, and healthcare. Your work has taken you to a secluded fishing village on Vancouver Island to focus on ecosystem conservation, to the U.S.-Mexico border to develop programs for asylum seekers and immigrant women, and to a premier ski resort in the Rockies, where you led a capital campaign to construct a clubhouse for Olympic hopefuls. Your most recent endeavor has been the publication of your book, Thresholds of Change, The Way Through Transformational Times, where you share about the common threads that you've learned about change through all of these incredibly diverse experiences. And I'm also so honored that we have been friends for decades. So it's so great to have you on the show. So can we start by you sharing a bit about your journey and including when you first learned about Riane Eisler and the impact that her work has had on your incredible journey?
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. And, I've been thinking a lot about how this whole thing evolved in my life. Of course, it's very clear that the Thresholds whole process and idea came through very specifically through my work. But if I go back even farther into my childhood, one of the things that I sort of put together was I moved 5 times before age 9, and I went to 10 schools before I graduated high school. So, without kind of realizing it, I was in a very, advanced course for change. The other thing was that my parents were educators and therapists, and they came out of a really traditional model for power and relationships, obviously, getting married in the 50s. But they were able to make the transition to a more, inclusive model. A lot of that came from my mother. And interestingly enough, Riane's book, The Chalice and the Blade, was on my parents' bookshelf. And her idea of looking at social systems, while I didn't understand that at the time as something that I was going to be doing, it is exactly what I have spent my career doing. And when I was in college, I remember I did a whole study on the role of the other in society. So I was looking at social systems myself from a pretty young age, not really kind of realizing it, but I think that's how a lot of our careers come along. So, but it wasn't until you got involved with Riane's work that I reacquainted myself with it and remembered, oh my goodness, and then saw all these parallels, the whole notion of partnership and not a top-down sort of, hierarchical way of being and making decisions and working together really resonates with me.
So from your decades of working with all of these diverse organizations and across the world, what have been the biggest challenges that you've seen that the domination paradigm creates for leaders as they're moving through change?
Yeah, I think that it's this sort of unspoken assumption that the leader knows the answer. And, when we're in a changing environment, I mean, look at where we are today. It is changing so fast. My niece just told me the other day, they're not even putting the prices on eggs in the grocery store because the prices are changing so fast. Isn't that a fascinating metaphor? That we can't even see the price of eggs because it's changing so fast. So what I notice is if we assume that the person in charge has the answer in times when we really don't know yet, we are going to act in ways that are actually probably going to thwart the change process that's trying to take place. And I'm not saying it's always an intentional thing, right? It's an old assumption that comes from very traditional models of power dynamics and structure in organizations. So it's something to kind of step back. And I think our best leaders are doing that. They're saying, wait a minute, I don't even know what the terrain is yet. How am I going to learn about that terrain? I'm going to bring a lot of people in and listen, right? That's how we can be able to see what's really there instead of just, my one singular view and moving forward. So the biggest thing I see when I come into organizations is a lot of time that's been spent trying things that perhaps the leader thought was going to work that then doesn't work. And that can create some real disappointment, disillusionment, even we might call it heartbreak, which is very difficult on a group of people. After you tried so many things and failed, it can feel like, well, this is never going to change. So that's probably my biggest challenge when I come in.
And I love how you brought up heartbreak because I think that connection with emotions and change is something that when I read your book, was really pleasantly surprised as I read the book when I was in the midst of some intense change and some very intense emotional upheaval that I had no real clue was so directly attached to that change. So can you talk a little bit about that emotional aspect of change and how do we create spaces where we can really acknowledge and help people through that as they're moving through change?
Well, what I've discovered in my many years of working with change in myself and in others is that emotions do play a very big part of change. So, number one, if we don't have any way to acknowledge that, if it's inappropriate to experience or name emotions, in change in the workplace, say, we're going to be kind of in trouble because it means those emotions are just going to sit under the surface. And I see that the emotions fester and they start to grow and they can act out in really, not so pleasant ways. And so finding the way to work with emotion, I think, begins when we understand that emotions are a key part of the change process. Not only do emotions create energy in us, change is a lot of an energy dynamic, right? It is actually something going away and being replaced by something else. That requires energy. Emotions bring energy to it. I mean, look at the word emotion. It's creating, right? Energetic motion. The other thing emotions are for in change is they are wonderful indicators of where we are in the process. So if we know, and I think this was your experience in reading the book, if we know that certain emotions are connected to a part of the change process, they don't seem so terrifying. Right? We can go, oh, just like, a big storm, a big winter storm in winter, we could be like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. Well, if we know this is what happens in winter, we can be better prepared for it. We have snow tires and we put boots in the car and things like that. So I think just starting from the point that emotions are a key part of change, and we don't need to either deny, ignore, or on the other hand, think they themselves are the problem, right? Emotions are not a problem. They are actually fodder for us to use if we can better understand.
So, can you talk now about the dynamic nature of change and the four thresholds you describe in your book that are part of all changes that we go through during our lives?
You bet. So when I was doing these change projects, I actually, at first in my career, I didn't call them change projects. I didn't know I was dealing with change. I was hired to do all kinds of things. And they were so diverse, as you mentioned, and that diversity was what helped me to notice that there was something common across them, no matter what the content, the people, the location, or how people were reacting to it. And I started to sense some sort of energy in that sameness that I use to know what to do with my clients and how to help them. And it was what I noticed is that what I was doing was extremely valuable. People were getting far more than they ever thought they could get. And so I started to think about what is it that I'm kind of sensing and working with. And I finally realized that it was the change process itself. Now, when we think about change, we don't normally think about a change process. When we think about climate, we certainly think about a change process. That's what the seasons are, right? There are 4 seasons, and climate moves through them, maybe in different ways in different parts of the world, but we're all conscious, of the fact that they exist. And that helps us to align our behavior. We don't plant in the winter, right? So I thought, wow, that's what's going on here. I'm sensing that there's a sequence of stages related to this change process, and I'm helping my clients to work with what's going on. And as a result, they're not only moving more easily through it, but they're getting so much more out of it. So once I discovered that, I thought, all right, now it's time for me to try to put a model to it and describe it. And that is exactly what Thresholds of Change is.
You are listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We hope you are enjoying today's episode and you will consider joining our family of sponsors. Or you can help us attract sponsors by downloading, following, or subscribing to the series and liking and rating each episode you view on YouTube. We also would love to hear from you, including if you have a partnership story that you would like to share. Reach out to us at center@partnershipway.org. And now, back to today's episode.
So my model is something that is new and hasn't been written before, but it's describing something that is absolutely the most natural process in the world, change, that we all have an innate ability with. So I think what people are discovering as they're reading the book Thresholds of Change is they are recognizing something they've been through thousands of times. And that is why the book, I think, is so affirming and so in many ways useful, because it's giving people language for something they've felt and experienced, but perhaps didn't have a way to talk about or understand in terms of like, how do I align with what's happening now instead of resisting it, which just makes change harder. And so there is one more thing I wanted to really highlight about how we create safe spaces when we're dealing with emotions and change. And one of those is the stance that we take toward change from the very beginning, which is the name of this podcast, right? Is that we partner with change. We don't see it as something happening at us or to us. It's something actually that's happening for us. It has an intent. And if we can work with it, if we can approach it as a partner or a collaborator, or as I call it, a companion, right? Then we have the opportunity to open and learn from it. Now, I know that this is a very challenging assignment when we're facing a change that we really think or we know we do not want. I get that. I'm not Pollyanna about that. But even in the most stark and difficult changes, like when my father died suddenly, I realized that in order to move through the grief, that was the first step. Have really ways to grieve him and to do it deeply and until it was complete, not giving it a time frame. But once I got to that point, then I could open to the question, what does his death, what is it that I'm supposed to grow and learn here from that? And that was an extraordinarily powerful question that opened me to possibilities that had not occurred to me before that.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the 4 thresholds now. Can you describe them for our
Yeah,
audience?
the thresholds are pretty big, and so doing it quickly is a little daunting, but I will give some idea. The first threshold is what I call instigation, and that is where we first see change starting to appear. Things are usually destabilizing. Things that worked don't anymore. It could be your car not starting, or it could be the way you're working with your child. All of a sudden, that's not working. Or it could be how you're functioning at the office. So at first, we see this as a problem, as something that's, uncomfortable. Yes, that generally is the beginning. Instead of trying to resist that or solve it, right, make it go away, we work to look at it and see what it might have to offer from us, and recognize surrendering what we already know about it is the first step to opening to what change is for, which is our growth and expansion. Once we've done that opening and crossed over, we move into the second threshold and stage, which is called the liminal. Now, the liminal is the time when actually the change begins to happen, right? Instigation is where it was saying, I'm coming, but liminal is where it actually starts to happen. And interestingly enough, change happens in the body before it happens in the mind. Think about a child. They don't tell you, I'm going to grow an inch this month, mom, right? The body does it. And the parents know how to support that child in their growth, giving them good food, enough sleep, and plenty of exercise and sunlight, right? So we can do the same in the liminal, but we are not going to yet understand it from a mind viewpoint. It's going to happen here. That is why it often feels kind of like we want to go inward. We don't have a lot of energy for the world. It takes a lot of energy to change, right? So after we've been in the liminal for a period, and that can be, a few weeks to a few years. I know that seems odd, but when we're going through big change, it can take a while. We start to watch for renewed energy. And that is when we start moving into metabolization. This is where the change has happened, but now the system, whether the individual or the group, starts to metabolize it through the whole system. We start to realize the change with our mind. We start to find ways of encouraging ourselves in our new behaviors or our new capabilities. And then one day, we all of a sudden just have it. We have our new normal. And this is the hardest threshold to recognize. It's the one that we go into manifestation. The change is fully done. It's fully manifested in our being. And often this stage, this moment goes unnoticed, right? Because it's so natural to us. But if we can start to become more aware and watch for it, we will notice it. And then we love to be in manifestation because it's so easy. We've reached that sort of pinnacle of our new self, and we're highly productive. The trick here is to not get too attached, because what's going to happen, we're going to move back into instigation again at some point.
Nice. Can you say a few words about my favorite chapter in the book titled Riot of Emotions?
Yes, we've been talking about how change is indeed an emotional experience. It is not always a difficult emotional experience. Think about changes you actually want, right? You experience a great deal of enthusiasm, perhaps curiosity, anticipation. Those are all the emotions that come forward when we want a change. So what I want to say is, if we can start to realize that all change, wanted and unwanted, has something for us, if we can bring at least curiosity. Maybe we can't bring enthusiasm, right? When my father died, I wasn't enthusiastic for sure, but I started to get curious. And through that curiosity, right, that growth was able to start to open to me.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So, Rebecca, in addition to reading your new book, Thresholds of Change, are there other resources or next steps you would recommend to our audience members who may be going through some significant changes or anticipating where they know a change needs to happen? Are there additional resources that you would recommend to them?
Well, Cherry, it's been very interesting and very gratifying for me when I've done talks about the book or workshops. People have asked such interesting questions, and I'm starting to put together different offerings for how to support people in applying thresholds. So I think the best thing to do is go to my website, which is RebeccaBorlandReynolds.com, and I know you'll put that in the show notes. And also sign up because for the mailing list, because I'll be offering different opportunities. But some of the examples are, for instance, book clubs. I'm noticing that people are really loving reading thresholds with a community. And one of the reasons for that, well, it's twofold. One, it's really helpful when you have a group that shares the same language. That's one of the things I noticed about change, the change process. We don't have common language for it. So it makes it very difficult to talk about change. We tell our stories over and over and over, but without the sort of larger framework of the process, it's harder to understand the meaning of those stories. So when we have a group to read the book with, we have that shared language and we can start to practice how to communicate. The other thing that's really valuable is that when everybody's reading it together, everybody's bringing a different change scenario to it. So I might be dealing with my father's death, but somebody else is dealing with a workplace change. Someone else is very concerned about the election or the global environmental changes we're experiencing. So you notice we can deal with change at many different contents, at all different scales, and still be able to talk with each other and support each other. So I want to support book groups or other groups in working with this. So as I said, there are going to be offerings on my website, and I invite people to come check it out.
Wonderful. Very exciting. So, Rebecca, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Before we end, I want to see if you have any final words that you'd like to share with our audience today.
I absolutely do. I think that the most important thing to remember about change and about actually how we are in the world at large is the most natural thing in the world. Change is very, very natural. But we thwart that natural process and our ability to work with it through our minds, second guessing, doubting, thinking we should know better, judging ourselves, right, as lazy or failing or slow or all the millions of things that we do. So if we can just remember, right, that change is natural and we have an innate, an inborn ability to change, that can maybe help us to calm a bit and to start to go interiorly, which is where the innate intelligence about change resides. It's not looking outside. And that's what the book is all about. The book is about giving you language and giving you support to go in and to experience your own experience of the change process. From that innate wisdom that's within us, we start to adopt that partnership idea with change, with ourselves, actually, right? And through doing that, it's such a much more loving approach, such a much more affirming approach, as opposed to the approach that I so often see people take or fall into. It's really just a habit of that self-judgment and being impatient and feeling like they're stupid because they don't have the answer to change. Change is not a problem to be solved. It's an experience to go through, even though at times it can be very difficult. So remembering that we're our own best partner in that. And if we need a partner to help us, right? That's what the book is for. That's what your community is for. So know that you don't need to approach this from a stance of resistance. It can be a stance of coming along with.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much again, Rebecca. It's really been a pleasure.
It has been my great pleasure. Thank you for having me, Cherry.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We're grateful to Rising Appalachia for the use of resilience as our Power of Partnership theme music. If you would like us to feature your partnership story, or if you would like to be a proud sponsor of the Power of Partnership podcast, please contact us at center@partnershipway.org. We hope you enjoyed this episode and will leave us a review on your favorite podcast channel. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released. I'm Cherry Jacobs Pruitt. See you next time on the Power of Partnership podcast.
I am resilient. I trust the movement. I negate the chaos. Uplift the negative. I'll show up at the table again and again and again. I'll close my mouth and learn to live.